DeVante Parker, a member of the New England Patriots via the Miami Dolphins, former 2015 first round pick. Once again, Alex, this is the first time that we've been on the pod to react to this trade. Before we get into all the domino effects and all the where we go from here's, how's your feeling just solely on the trade in a vacuum? DeVante Parker in a 5th round pick in 2022 for a 2023 3rd round pick going back to Miami.
Yeah, I think it's a good trade. I think you can't really hate it. You look at what Parker's upside is, right? Potential 1,000-yard guy, and I've gotten some heat for saying that on Twitter. He had 1,000 yards 2 years ago with Ryan Fitzpatrick. Second year Mac Jones should be better than Ryan Fitzpatrick was in 2019. So he's got to stay healthy, which is a huge if, and we should just throw that caveat out there for the entire show because I think it's going to come up quite a bit. He has to stay healthy. I'm not as concerned with his injuries as some people. I think it's the red flag. I do. But it's not like he's missing huge chunks of time, although he's only played one full season, which is alarming. To put a little silver lining on it, he's never played fewer than 10 games. So he does, it's not like he's not, like, remember last year we did this with Hunter Henry.
Right.
Where it was, oh, he's missed all this time. Like, he had missed full seasons. Parker's never missed more than 6 games in a season. Only one full season. So, like, you can go both ways with that. That's obviously the big caveat. That's the big if, right, with this. If he's healthy, I think if he's healthy, he's an upgrade over Nelson Aguilar. He's now their best wide receiver. I think they're going to have a way to use him. They needed that big body guy, that contested catch guy, guys like that with a very accurate quarterback like Mac Jones you can take advantage of. This is also going to open Kendrick Bourne up to do a lot more. I think Bourne, by default, kind of became their contested catch guy last year in some situations, at least down the field. We all remember, right, the throw to from Mac to Bourne against Cleveland for the touchdown was probably
the year.
That was probably the best in terms of, like, you know, skill level. That's probably the best play the Patriots made all year on the offensive side of the ball. And Kendrick Bourne's that's not necessarily his skill set. It's great that he can make that catch. I want to see him getting open and then creating with the ball in his hands, right? That's the kind of pass you throw DeVante Parker. And Bourne's what, 5'11", I think? Parker's 6'2". So you just have more opportunity with that kind of throw. And ultimately, they give up a top 100 pick. Well, they moved down. It was a pick swap. It doesn't really feel like that because it's split over 2 years. Maybe they have a guy they like in the 3rd this year. They didn't want to part with that pick. You know, who knows what the board will look like next year. They'll take their chances next year. They'll get the comp pick, which by no reason means that this is nothing, right? You could have had 2/3 next year. You still gave up a top 100 pick, but move down 80 spots to see if Parker still has it. And Parker's a top 32 receiver in the league if he does still have it. You can't hate that, right? You really, as long as he stays healthy, and if you're worried about that, that's fine. That's fair. As long as he stays healthy, it feels like a pretty safe deal. This isn't just blindly trading a second for Mohamed Sanu and then trying to force him out there on a bad ankle. Like, that was a mess. People have compared it to that. It's not that. It's a different move.
So DeVante Parker's injury history is all soft tissue stuff. It's hamstrings, it's pulls, it's things like that. On the one hand, that's a concern when a guy has consistently, especially a skill player, those soft tissue type of injuries. But on the other hand, you do hope that potentially the Patriots strength and conditioning staff can do a little bit better job of keeping him healthy and keeping him on the field. That's not to say that the Dolphins have some notoriously bad strength and conditioning staff, but you just hope that the guys here in New England who were able to keep Hunter Henry on the field, for example, like you said, and
So if I can just cut in, like, Hunter Henry raved about that at the end of the year last year, how important it was for him to play a full season and how much the team helped him get his body in shape to be able to play a full season. Like, does it guarantee he's going to play 17 games? Hardly. But that's also not nothing. It's something to pay attention to here.
So here's the thing. The way that I look at it in terms of roster construction is that I truly believe that Bill Belichick looks at wide receivers. I think I shouldn't say we, but I think a lot of people look at wide receivers as wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 on the depth chart, right? In terms of pecking order, and is this guy a number 1 wide receiver? And is he a guy that is the top dog in an offense? And maybe DeVante Parker can half check that box. I don't think he fully checks it just because you don't know if he's going to be out there for 17 plus games, but maybe he
When
half
he's out
checks
there, I think
it.
when he's out there, he checks it.
I think he's close. But bigger than that, I think with Belichick and the Patriots, they look at the wide receivers by roles and by almost creating a basketball lineup for different types of wide receivers, right? You got guys like Jacoby Myers and Kendrick Bourne and Nelson Aguilar, who are your wings, a little bit more finesse players, guys that are faster, the guys that play more on the inside. Those are the types of guys that maybe you're 1 through 4. The Patriots looked at their depth chart and said, we don't have our power forward. We don't have our center. We don't have a big bodied outside guy that can go up and win at the catch point, because that guy's supposed to be N'Keal Harry, but he's obviously not living up to those expectations. So I think when you look at it now, you see a guy that since 2019 has led the NFL in contested catches. This is not a burner. This is not a separator. This is not an elite speed guy. This is not an elite route runner. This is a go up and get the football type of wide receiver. And when I wrote my film review about Parker on CLNS.com, I went back to that throw that Mac Jones had, the interception against Buffalo in the wild card round, opening drive, Micah Hyde going over the top. We talked about the play after the game, I'm sure, Alex, here on the pod. Nelson Aguilar never went up for the ball, right? He runs the double move. He gets behind the defense. He creates that separation. Mac puts the ball up there on a platter, and Nelson Aguilar is waiting on the football, trying to let it drop in the bucket and drop in his hands. With a guy like Parker, 6'2", 6'3", with his size and his alpha mentality, that mentality of when the football is in the air, it's my ball. It's nobody else's ball. It's my ball. He makes that catch. Does he get into that position? Does he blow by the defense like that? Not necessarily. But when Mac Jones puts that ball up between two defenders, he's one of those guys that's going to win down the field and make sure that he's the one that comes up with the football. And I don't think the Patriots felt like they ever really had that consistent of an option in that vein. When I look at the way that he runs routes, when I look at the way that he can be used, I do go back to a 2018 Josh Gordon comparison. I heard the 2014 Brandon LaFell comparison as well. That one is not terrible either, where you're just looking to get a guy that can run that vertical route tree, hitches, dig routes, slants, fades, right? That's going to be, he's going to be a 3 or 4 route guy, but he's going to do it at a pretty good level. And especially the down the field stuff, he's going to do it at a very good level. And they now have a receiving core when you throw in the tight ends as well, where you say there's some matchups here, right? If you don't have a good outside corner that's got some size to go up against Parker, if you don't have a box safety or a linebacker that can run with tight ends, if you don't have a inside defenders that can hang with 2 good slot receivers in Bourne and Myers, they might not have the best receiving core on paper. They might not have Tyreek Hill. They might not have Devontae Adams, but they have a bunch of different guys that can do different things and are good in different ways. And I think that that's kind of what they're going for here with this DeVante Parker trade. On the one hand, I do have reservations because he's not that route runner that we've seen work here in the past. This is not Julian Edelman. This is not Wes Welker. This is not Deion Branch even, right? This is a true big outside receiver that wins at the catch point. That's not typically what they do well. And you mentioned that 2019 season with Ryan Fitzpatrick. The one difference I would say, I would agree that Mac is obviously a better quarterback than Ryan Fitzpatrick, but Ryan Fitzpatrick's a YOLO quarterback. He's somebody that is a gunslinger that's going to be willing to throw those jump balls down the field and willing to push the football outside the numbers. Is that going to ever be a high volume role in this offense? Is Mac Jones going to give a guy like DeVante Parker 40 contested targets a year? Because that's how you produce in that role, is if you have volume and then you turn that volume into a 50-55% catch rate, and now all of a sudden you have good numbers. Is that ever going to be a big enough role in their offense, or are they really looking at Parker as more of a niche guy, that when they wanted to use that role, when they get that one-on-one backside, when they are in the red zone, potentially down by the goal line, they want to throw him a fade or have him box out in tight quarters. Is he more of a niche guy or is he a volume guy for the Patriots moving forward? I think is something that remains to be seen with this trade.
Yeah, I'd say at the same time though, clearly having the burner at the X wasn't the answer, right? They didn't get the production they needed from Nelson Aguilar there, or frankly last year with Demir Bird. Those two put up very similar numbers, which tells me it's the role. So I guess he could be a niche player and a situational player. I don't think they give up a top 100 pick for a situational player. This tells me that the X role is going to look different this year than it has the last 3 years, 2-3 years, right? That's more how I read it.
So my concern, right? I guess my concern is that although I definitely think that N'Keal Harry has to stomach some of the blame here, right? He has to take some of the reason why, if not the majority of it, of why it hasn't worked out here in New England. But we've talked a lot about this, and that is, did they ever really use him in the best possible way, right? Did they ever really allow him to be the guy that was going to allow him to thrive in their offense and in the NFL? Parker is a similar type of guy. I mean, I just mentioned the stats since 2019, leads the league in contested catches. That's where a lot of his production comes from. I like the player. I like the trade. I think it's good value, right? In terms of 2 years, $12.6 million for DeVante Parker, where you're only moving back a couple of rounds in the draft. That's a great value trade for the Patriots, especially with the way that the wide receiver market has looked. And we'll get to that in a second. This is a bargain of a contract. If the player puts up 800 yards, it's a bargain of a contract. But is it the skill set that all of us have been clamoring for? And is it the skill set that is normally produced here? Not necessarily, but I do think that he has more of a repertoire. And that's a big thing that I'm positive with on the move as well, is that if you look at his short and intermediate route tree, he has that ability to run a hitch, to run a slant, to run a comeback, and build compliments off of just the fade. So that's what keeps guys honest, is if you can run that dig route, if you can run that slant, if you can run that under, now you can't just sit all over the fade. You have to respect the fact that he might break underneath the defense. And that, I think, is something that puts him over the top in that sort of skill set that N'Keal Harry never touched that, right? N'Keal Harry could never build a route tree, whereas DeVante Parker has a multiple routes that he can go to in his bag.
Which was the hope, that N'Keal Harry would eventually become that player, right? It just never got to that point. I would say, look at what they're doing on the defensive side of the ball, right? And they're making all these changes. And I think on offense, Josh McDaniels out the door. We know they're moving on, at least from the traditional fullback. Maybe things are changing on the offensive side of the ball too. Yeah. I mean, that's what we really thought going in. We didn't think they were going to change on defense. That kind of came out of nowhere. We kind of suggested maybe the offensive philosophy might change a little bit with no more Josh McDaniels, and just some of the personnel moves that have been made over the last couple of years. And I think we maybe lost track of that conversation with the defensive overhaul. But maybe this is the new thing. Maybe this is it. I think they realized that what they were doing offensively forget the not having the talent, because I think that was only part of it. I think stylistically their passing game didn't make a ton of sense, right? The burner deep threat really only works if you throw them the ball occasionally. If you don't, teams are going to dare you to throw that because they're just seeing on tape you're not going to do it, right? So I think maybe there's a change in philosophy coming to the passing game. I still think they're going to lean heavily on the running game, as they should. They've got a good offensive line. They've got great backs. They play in the Northeast. Like, the running game should still be a big part of what they do. I'm sorry, Evan. I know that rips your heart out. But in terms of how the passing game is designed, I think maybe there's some philosophical shifts coming, and I think it's going to be for the better. And we'll really know after the draft, especially if they take a receiver.
Yeah. So when you watch Mac at Alabama, definitely more of a vertical offense at Alabama. Now, granted, that was because he had Devontae Smith and Jalen Waddle and all these dudes out there that were running vertical routes. But at the same time, when you watched him at Bama, it wasn't the short and intermediate. He was chucking it, right? I mean, he was throwing the ball deep down the field. The biggest things that he attacked down the field.
throwing it down the field to receivers coming out of the slot.
Yeah, slot fades, over routes, deep crossers, whatever you want to call those, and go balls, right? Those are a big part of Alabama's offense. And guys like DeVante Smith especially, but Mechie obviously in that year too with Mac Jones, won a ton of battles down the field at the catch point. And I think that's where they're going for with this move, is that they do want to push the ball down the field a little bit more, hopefully. And in order to do that, they're going to need some guys that can go up and get it. And I think that that's a big thing that they wanted to get out of DeVante Parker. And the biggest thing is, good.
No, I just think the other thing it does, and this has maybe gotten caught a little bit in the weeds, but I talked with Phil Perry about this when I was on the Sunday Football Show on the Sports Hub Sunday morning. If Nelson Aguilar is not at the X, it doesn't mean he's off the field. It gives them some opportunities to move him around, and he really wasn't true. Yeah. He really wasn't a true X until he got to Vegas in 2019. The idea of, because I've talked about this before, like they would run Mechie just vertically out of the slot at Alabama, and Mac was great with that. Mac was great because it's covered differently. It's a little more maneuverable as a quarterback. Take Nelson Aguilar, put him in the slot inside DeVante Parker, have Parker use his size to come over the mid. Like this is, kind of a basic example, but Parker slants over the middle, that clears it out. You shoot Nelson Aguilar up the seam like that. Like that's the kind of stuff they're doing at Alabama. Those big receivers come over the middle and use their size in traffic. You take the quick receiver, you run him up the hashes where he's dealing with a slot corner or a safety, not a boundary corner. Like that's where Mac's success at Alabama came from. It's where Tua, like that's the Alabama offense. That's when they're at their best. That's what they're doing. They didn't really have that option in the slot. Meyer's a good slot receiver, but he doesn't have the speed. He doesn't have the speed to play that way. If Nelson Aguilar can start taking some snaps out of the slot, that could be big. That could really change the way things move.
Thanks for watching our coverage of the 6-time Super Bowl champion New England Patriots. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Patriots Press Pass, for a lot more exclusive content on the Patriots right here on CLNSmedia.com.